Hello, everyone. This is the Mind of Lilith, and thank you for joining me today. I wanted to take a little time out to share my thoughts and opinions about Project 2025, which is essentially a manifesto for restoring the United States back to its Christian, conservative, socioeconomic, and cultural foundations by overhauling multiple government agencies and departments that have been weaponized against the American people for decades. I took some time out to peruse this document, and it's actually the most interesting and entertaining book that I've read in many years. If you guys want a comment section and a poll in the community section of this channel, let me know if you want me to go over each of the chapters in this document, one podcast episode at a time. This book is over 800 pages long, so I'm not going to go over it all in one sitting. In one of the chapters, one of the contributors of this book laments the fact that the U.S. government is spending too much time attempting to correct the mistakes of the past by way of the racial equity movement, the CRT agenda, even the LGBT agenda, the reparations movement, etc., etc. The author of one of these chapters said that the U.S. government is spending too much time attempting to correct the mistakes of the past by focusing too much on old threats instead of the new threat, which is China. This person intentionally did not elaborate on what the mistakes of the past were. So I'm going to take a little time today to guess what they're talking about when they mention the mistakes of the past. And based on what I've gleaned from this book so far, the Christian fundamentalist Freemasons are trying to course correct the United States because they finally realized that they're being double-crossed by the same tribe that they've colluded with to destroy the Black community over the past 60 to 70 years. Indigenous Black Americans, not immigrants, have always been considered an existential threat to the Christian white supremacist paradigm. Immigrants are not a threat because if they cause too much ruckus, they can easily be deported. And the U.S. is not their mother country, so they're less inclined to be nationalistic or Black nationalists. As some of you guys know, after World War II, the U.S. government brought in Nazis from Germany and Japan and members of the tribe to strengthen the U.S. intelligence community and the national security apparatus. And one of their star players was the late Henry Kissinger. Their job was to create systems that neutralize threats to Christian white supremacy at home and abroad. Christian white supremacy is not just ideological, it's socioeconomic and it's political. So for domestic affairs, the FBI, for example, created the COINTELPRO program to destroy the Black liberation movement. The FBI also colluded with the CIA to import millions of tons of drugs into Black communities to fund government destabilization operations in Latin America and Africa, while again destroying the Black community, which was and still is perceived as an existential threat. For this agenda of Black destruction to be successful, these covert operations had to be well organized, well funded, and with a singular focus. Make sure that no darkies could ever pose a threat to the national security interests of the United States. This is one of the reasons why, since the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, the U.S. government flooded Black communities with immigrants from Asia, the Middle East, and the Caribbean, while simultaneously outsourcing millions of industrial jobs from urban centers like Detroit, Gary, Indiana, St. Louis, New York, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, etc. While they were outsourcing jobs and bringing in immigrants to Black communities, they also imported tons of heroin and cocaine into the Black community and then imported gang culture and gang weapons into these same communities. A couple years ago, I think it was in 2022, geopolitical analyst Peter Zeihan told Joe Rogan that in the 21st century, not the 19th century, not the 20th century, in the 21st century, the CIA used the Sinaloa Mexican drug cartel to wipe out the Black gangs in Chicago by the year 2012-2013. Now, please remember that during this time period, Chicago was called Chirac, right? Chirac, because there were multiple shootings on a daily basis, none of which was actually solved. Nobody knew who was mass shooting crowds of black people, black men, women, children. Nobody knew what was going on. All of this was blamed on so-called animalistic black people who don't belong in society and who need to be put down or re-enslaved or incarcerated. The carnage that was committed against the black community was blamed on the black community, period. Okay, so please remember that this genocide took place while tribal member and President Barack Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, was mayor of Chicago. So now at the same time, we have mass immigration, massive job outsourcing, drugs being imported into the communities, and guns being imported into the communities since the 1960s. The government, the FBI, CIA, and other intelligence agencies were hunting down Black political leaders like MLK and Malcolm X and Khalid Muhammad, and the Black Panther members like Huey Newton and Fred Hampton, who only wanted to help poor, marginalized, and disenfranchised members of the Black community. They weren't necessarily interested in waging war against the state or the government. They just wanted the exploitation, terrorism, and oppression of Black people to stop. Now, I don't know if they were aware of this or not, but Black equality inherently poses a threat to white supremacy because racism is a competition for resources, land, money, women, power, etc. Supremacy is not equality. So if you're equal to me, then I can't be superior to you. So fighting for equal rights made Black people an existential threat to the social order that was established by the white Christian fundamentalists who so-called founded this country. So to punish the Black community and weaken it, the U.S. government outsourced jobs, brought in immigrants and drugs, killed leaders, etc. But that was not enough. They used the destruction of the Black community to create the prison industrial complex via 3 strikes, Rockefeller drug laws, crime bills from the 70s and up into the 90s, okay? In other words, after these people killed our spirit by way of slavery, impoverishment, oppression, watching our political leaders be killed off, the Vietnam War, the drugs and everything else, after our spirit was killed, which is why a lot of us are chronically depressed and a lot of us have a difficult time assimilating into society. The government had to warehouse our bodies in prisons and then use us for cheap labor for the state and corporations. And while these Black men were being institutionalized in these prisons, many of them were being infected with HIV while they were in jail, right? So these institutionalized Black men could not be good husbands or fathers to Black women and children, and mass incarceration as a result was an act of genocide. And the Black community is well within its right to file a class action lawsuit against the federal government for the 20th century terrorism alone. We don't need to go back to slavery for reparations. What the U.S. government did to the Black community in the 20th century alone, not the 17th, 18th, or 19th centuries, the 20th century alone, what they did to Black people was a disgrace. It was disgraceful what they've done. And now they're paying for it. They set the traps and watched as millions of Black people destroyed themselves with drugs, guns, and gangs. So the system of Black destruction was successful. The COINTEL program critically wounded the Black community to the point where the white supremacists thought they could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that a lot of Black men and women have been psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually destroyed. The problem is, however, the system that was created to destroy Black Americans still exists. It still needs funding. It is a hydra that still needs to eat. So if Black Americans are no longer a threat, South America and the Caribbean and Africa are in shambles, why do these national security and intelligence agencies still exist? Well, by and large, they still have to exist to maintain the dysfunction and the destruction. But remember earlier when I mentioned that after World War II, Nazis and tribal members were brought in to strengthen the U.S. government? Historically, tribe members and Christians are sworn enemies, which is one of the reasons why there was a Spanish Inquisition in the first place. By edict and their own religious laws, tribal members are loyal to no one outside of the tribe. But the white Christian fundamentalists were willing to overlook this for the sake of destroying Black people, and some white people who were rallying against the agenda of white supremacy, aka U.S. national security interests. As the decades progressed, the tribe has gotten richer, stronger, and more powerful, while at the same time, the Christian fundamentalists have been weakened significantly. They've become a victim of their own hubris and iniquity. The tribe has infiltrated all branches of the U.S. government and the government agencies. The tribe was smart enough to use Black people as pawns to further their own socio-political agenda. The tribe promotes progressive policies for other groups of people that they do not support within their own community. The tribe is not diverse. It is very insular, very rich, and very intentional about going back to the glory days, when white men, white women, and other goyim were food for the tribe. So the authors of Project 2025 are Christian conservatives, aka Catholic Freemasons. They are aware of what is at stake, and they have taken an oath to do whatever it takes to maintain their power, including defunding the government agencies that have been infiltrated by the tribe who are working with the Chinese government. Essentially, the system that was created and used to attack and destroy the Black community is now being used to attack and destroy white Americans. In multiple sections of this book, China is acknowledged as a real existential threat to U.S. supremacy nationally and abroad. This manifesto is advising the United States to pivot their focus away from old threats, aka Black people, Russia, Cuba, and focus on a new threat of China. So again, outsourcing jobs to Asia to disenfranchise Black people and whites in America as well has backfired. China is on its way to becoming a global superpower, which challenges the global hegemony of the United States. The tribe knows this, and so they're getting prepared to join the winning team. Although this was not explicitly stated in the document, not to my knowledge anyway, right? I might have to read it over. If China is a national security threat, then so is the tribe, because the tribe has been colluding with China since at least the 1970s, engaging in espionage to help the Chinese military, to help the Chinese pharmaceutical and medical industries, to help China with technology. They have been working with the Chinese for some decades. The tribe also controls all of the Ivy League institutions in the United States, through which millions of model minority Chinese nationals have gotten educated, and some of them were working for the CCP. The tribal elite understand that if they help China become a superpower, they become a superpower by proxy. And this is a form of magic that is used in Hollywood and the entertainment industry. A celebrity becomes a money printer by way of the machine. And the more famous and successful the celebrity, the richer their tribal handlers become. If I make you a star and I make you rich, I become rich by association, regardless of whether or not I have any talent, any skills, or anything else, okay? So, in 2019, right before the COVID pandemic started, a Harvard University professor named Charles Lieber was arrested for working with the Wuhan University of Technology, which allowed him to help Chinese nationals smuggle biological materials from U.S. research laboratories to Wuhan laboratories. Lieber had a $15 million research contract with the Department of Defense, and this case was one of the many examples of tribal members working at these elite institutions, sharing U.S. intelligence and military secrets and biological weapons research information with the Chinese. Now, the Christian evangelists are determined to take back their power before they are returned back to their medieval Slavic origins. So how will Project 2025 affect Black Americans? Unfortunately, because Black people are completely dependent on the system for everything from education, defense, labor, agriculture, housing, etc. If the system collapses, we will collapse with it. And this is what Dr. King meant when he said, "I have integrated my people into a burning building," aka a Ponzi scheme, house of cards situation. So at this point, I think Project 2025 is designed to intercept Agenda 2030, which is the establishment of a centralized one world order that is controlled by a technocracy. If you guys ever watched the Superman cartoon series, Agenda 2030 will turn this planet into Krypton, essentially, which was controlled by an artificial intelligence named Brainiac. The current climate catastrophes that we are witnessing and experiencing on this planet can largely be attributed to corporations turning jungles, forests, and arable land into condos, data centers, and crypto mining farms, which is destroying the ecosystem. Duh, right? So, like Brainiac, the major corporations don't care about the environment or sustainability. They're energy vampires, and they're using their technology to suck the life out of the planet, just like Brainiac did. And then when Brainiac was done, it escaped with the DNA of the planet codified in its system. And this DNA was the source code for sustaining life on a new planet, aka Earth or any other planet that it wanted to migrate to. Hence Starlink, right? So anyway, one of the tenets of Project 2025 is to defund the administrative apparatus of the federal government, which hires millions of people. They want to do this for a couple of reasons. I'm not going to get into all the reasons in this conversation, but if I go through the rest of the agenda, I'm going to expound on this further. Okay. So number one, the Christian conservative right-wing extremists, in a sense, they believe that the federal employees earn too much money, which gives them power and leverage that corporations who cannot or will not compete with. Corporations don't want to pay people a living wage, especially if you're Black. In fact, if you guys remember a clip that I showed you guys a couple weeks ago, this mega mind entrepreneur basically stated that employees need to know their place. We need to know they're our bosses and we have to do whatever they say. Government jobs are a great source of financial security for many people, and many of the Christian right believe that Black people belong on the lower tier of the socioeconomic ladder, regardless of merit, skill, intellect, or education. Hence the term Black jobs. Many of these people feel some kind of way about Charles County and Prince George County in Maryland, which are two of the wealthiest counties that are predominantly Black in the United States. And many people who live in those counties are federal employees. So the second reason is Christian evangelists who wrote this document believe that federal employees have been corrupted by their proximity to power, which is why they support progressive policies that are corrosive to the Christian power base. In other words, if you're getting paid by a corrupt system, why would you want to change it? Why would you want to rebel against it? So the tribe was smart enough to take over the legislative and executive branch of the U.S. government with their lobbies, bribes, and blackmails. Hence, the Mossad agent, Jeffrey Epstein. And administrative employees are legally obligated to execute or enforce policies that were ratified by the progressive left in Congress, which is controlled by the tribe completely, while the tribe is loyal to the security interests of Israel or the tribe itself. In my opinion, Project 2025 is a last-minute attempt to reverse decades of social engineering that weakened all Americans, the American family, and the American economy. Because, during the 1960s, the ruling class realized that if the average American has knowledge by way of a great public education system, economic stability by way of industrial jobs, and freedom, then they will be able to challenge the status quo of the ruling class, which is why they created the hippie counterculture, free love drug movement that turned a generation of boomers into selfish druggy prostitutes who had no regards for the responsibilities of family and community. So in the 1960s, probably even before then, the ruling class determined that Americans can have only one out of the three: freedom, knowledge, or stability. If you have freedom without knowledge or economic stability, you essentially become a third world country. If you have knowledge without freedom or stability, you end up like Julian Assange, a political prisoner. If you have stability without freedom or knowledge, not propaganda, that's the difference, knowledge, you end up like dumbed down, fat, lazy, and sick Americans who did not know that Joe Biden was senile until 2 weeks ago. And speaking of dumb, fat, lazy, and sick Americans who've been sickened by the Food and Drug Administration, by drugs, by environmental toxins, all this stuff that was deliberately done by the corporations to weaken the population, one of the directives of Project 2025 is mandatory ROTC enrollment and military service. They want to remasculinize the white population, which they believe has been neutered by progressive left policies. It is the reason why Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Stephen Colbert, Ella DeGeneres and Anderson Cooper look and sound exactly alike. So this androgynous metrosexual aesthetic that they've created over the past 15 to 20 years. And this is also why you are now hearing rich white conservatives like Tucker Carlson tell white men to have babies, whether they can afford them or not. This is huge because, ironically, Black women and men were maligned for decades as welfare queens and kings for having babies they could not afford because their men had been economically disenfranchised by the state by way of all of the programs and agendas that I outlined earlier in this discussion. So now, because the anti-family, anti-community agenda was successful, the Black and white American birth rate is below replacement levels, so the government has to import tens of millions of fertile immigrants to replace the population in order to fund boomer and Gen X retirement. Okay? What is the moral of the story here? The moral of the story is, if you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. The Christian fundamentalist left is petrified that China is about to eat their lunch because they were too damn busy spending the past 100 years, at the very least, trying to destroy Black Americans and developing nations in the Caribbean, Africa, and Latin America, and also the Middle East. They're also aware, the Christian fundamentalists are also aware that the tribe of people that they've used to create these systems of oppression and destruction, they're using BIPOC to disempower Christian white evangelists while elevating themselves in Israel. The Black community is by and large loyal to the white liberal progressive left because, honestly, we were tired of begging for jobs, begging for scraps, being poor and destitute in the country that we helped to build. We wanted to spend money like white Americans. So the tribe came in and they saw how pitiful we were financially. They bought our culture and they paid us peanuts for our talent and for our ingenuity when white Christians wanted to pay us less than that, if at all. If you guys remember, after slavery ended, Black people were the most skilled labor in the United States. The U.S. government imported millions of Irish, millions of Scottish, millions of white people from Europe to economically displace Black Americans. And then these white people formed unions to prevent Black people who were really, really skilled at masonry and bricklaying and carpentry and so on from any gainful employment, okay? And so, massive immigration has been weaponized against the Black community for decades, centuries. This is nothing new for us, okay? So we wanted to spend our money like white people, and the tribal elite saw that we were in a desperate condition. We had a lot of talent, a lot of potential, and they said, you know what? Let us give these poor Black people some opportunities, right? Now we have Diddy and Sexy Red and Cardi B and Soulja Boy and other ignorant Black people who were plucked from poverty and desperation to be the court jesters for the tribal elite. Because remember, the tribal elite are not loyal to anybody, especially Black. But with that said, regardless of whichever agenda is passed, whether it's Project 2025 or Agenda 2030, Black people are in trouble if we do not find a way to disentangle ourselves from this system. There is no great white or Chinese or tribal hope that is going to save us from the responsibility of tending to our own vine and fig tree, meaning tend to the affairs of your own community. Take responsibility for educating your children, feeding them healthy food, building strong and healthy and safe communities, cultivating healthy relationships with friends and lovers, getting married, working on our mental health, getting in shape physically. These Christian evangelists are getting prepared to fight a war to maintain the so-called sovereignty of the United States against the global elite. And if you're not on their side, you will be mowed down and considered an enemy of their agenda. In closing, Black people have a choice between two futures. With Project 2025, you'll be forced to be self-sufficient as a community without relying on the government for jobs and other resources. However, this is an opportunity to rebuild the Black community by way of rebuilding the Black family, to restore Black Wall Street, so to speak. Black Wall Street was not created post-civil rights. It was created during Jim Crow U.S., okay? So when we were forced to rely on ourselves, we built strong and thriving communities. After integration, we started to rely on the white man to provide for us, or the government to provide for us. And that has been a double-edged sword. Now, today, The Black community is currently aligned with the progressive left agenda, which has provided some economic stability at the expense of marriage, family, and community. So individually, many Black people are doing very well financially. But after watching 1 million videos about high-value men and women, about 50-50 relationships, and Dusties and single mothers and BT1000s and passport bros, one can surmise that regardless of how much money we can flex on the gram now as Black people, many Black men and women cannot find suitable partners for marriage and building a family. So you can choose between Project 2025 or Agenda 2030. Agenda 2030 is basically more of what we'll have now. More government oversight, more, government mandates, gender neutrality, abortions, anti-family, whatever. It is what it is, right? You can believe what you want to believe. You can support what you want to support. With Project 2025, it is a double-edged sword. They are attempting to return the country back to the way it was pre-civil rights in a sense, in many cases. Okay, here's the thing. There are pros and cons to Project 2025. It's just that the cons suck really bad to the point where they neutralize the pros. And that is how these Freemasons operate. You have to give with one hand, take with the other. I'm going to give you guys civil rights. I'm going to give you guys equality under the protection of the federal law. But after giving you these so-called rights, I'm going to take away your jobs and I'm going to basically flood your communities with drugs. I'm going to give with one hand and take with the other. That is how the Freemasons operate, okay? So, again, if you guys want me to go through Project 2025 more thoroughly, let me know in the comment section and the community poll. I'm going to leave it there. I look forward to reading your feedback. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon.